Hi there, welcome back. We're reading Hollow Kingdom, Chapter 8. Let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 8 ST, University Branch, the Seattle Public Library, Seattle, Washington, USA. Dennis seemed to have perked up after the Yarrow application. I admitted to myself that it was a better remedy than my weed competition flyer and had to eat a little crow, if you'll pardon the expression. Hey, in my defense, everything I learned about veterinary care was from Animal Planet, and they didn't tend to get overly technical on Breed All About It. We headed south, following Crye's directions. I used the snaking gray river of I-5 as my guide, soaring above to check our immediate vicinity. Dennis had no qualms about me riding him now and then, as long as he got to catch up on his P-mail and work toward his unwavering goal of watering every grass blade in the Pacific Northwest. I-5 South was a ghost of itself, missing its pulse, the touch and droning hum of wheels. Cars were strewn around it, silent and sleeping. Some had crashed into one another, bodies black and crumpled with dents. I rapped my beak on the rear windshield of a mud-splattered minivan, tapping on the superhero's decal. Dad superhero, mom superhero, and 3 little superheroes. Even a superhero dog, all with capes and smiles and arms punching the air in victory. Other than a Pokemon toy, there was no trace of them in the van. But I had a good feeling about them because superheroes can survive anything. I saw Superman stop a bullet with his iris one time. I dropped Earthbound to check for survivors intermittently, finding evidence of horror movie endings in the form of sparkling shards, or in a mofo's lonely bones, and the tenacious blue and green skin that clung to them. And everywhere that greedy reek of rotting meat hanging in the air like a ghoul that grabs at your tongue. Many mofos had perished there, in their vehicles, their destinations waiting forever. I thought of their families and felt a pang of gratitude that Big Jim was still mostly alive. My recon safety checks were frequent but cursory since I didn't like to leave Dennis for long. From the sky I could recognize clusters of sick mofos, their humped backs and snapping turtlenecks, scraping with their fingers, smashing their heads against medians and trucks and fallen motorbikes. We took detours where there were sick mofos. My keen eyes hunted for uprightness, the miraculously vertical, straight-backed glory, and the steady gait that exemplify a healthy mofo. I knew they were out there. Hope flickered a little tiny pilot light inside of me, keeping dark thoughts at bay. I thought of the frolicking in the Cymbalta commercial, and I knew we had to keep moving. A freeway sign caught my eye. It had been brightened with lightly faded graffiti, an intricate scene that had the runny, bubbled words "Born to be Wild" over a realistic picture of a lion licking an ice cream cone. Instead of a ball of ice cream, the cone held a grenade. Anarchy or art, those mofos certainly were creative. The doomed African king was surrounded by rudimentary scribbles. One said, "Rather not be human." Another, "Kurt Cobain forever." Another scroll said, "The 4 horsemen are here. They came on the wings of a breeze." Ridiculous. Horses are way too heavy for that shit. With every step Dennis and I took, there was palpable agitation. Airborne collywobbles clouding the air. Even the sun peeked through the clouds cautiously, unsure and perhaps afraid of what she might illuminate in the broken city below. A swift flight to the west allowed me to hover over Gasworks Park on the north shore of Lake Union. From my bird's eye view, the park was almost recognizable. Big Jim says that most things can be fixed with duct tape, but staring at that changed park, I was dubious. At some point, a Boeing 747 had tumbled from the clouds and collided with the red skeleton of the old gasification plant, birthing a mangled mess of aluminum and demolition and bloody rust. Bobbing gently in Lake Union yards away, the tail and blades of a King 5 helicopter peeked out from above the waterline. The park's beautiful sundial, centrally located on a grassy hill, which allows a flightless mofo to enjoy Seattle's skyline, was charred and burnt, its face forever scarred. Black bruises kissed the park where small fires had erupted. A couple of skeletons, big and small, cowered under a picnic table. Then a flurry caught my eye. A ghoulish gaggle of vulture-necked mofos were huddled in a mass by the park's concrete arches. The gray ghosts of old train trestles. Mofos crawled over one another, a living tumor of blood and tissue. I couldn't see what they were scrambling for, what was at the epicenter of this pileup of doom, but knew better than to get close. No, the healthy mofos weren't in Gasworks Park. They'd found shelter elsewhere. Sadness tugged at my tail feathers. Although whatever had taken over Big Jim had obviously hit my neighborhood the worst, it had spread farther than I thought, desecrating my home city and its gorgeously iconic bits. In Lake Union, boats bobbed aimlessly, sails flying flat against the water like soaked surrender flags. The sky was painfully silent without the brassy blare of brightly colored seaplanes overhead. Everything felt too quiet, like held breath. There was no longer the fastest growing city in America. This was a battleground, a war zone. And yet on the far side of the park, I saw deer grazing on the dense, jungly grass that grew everywhere, stretching their necks to reach the vines and creepers that hung down from tree crowns. I told Dennis we should get a move on, and we made our way farther down the phantom of I-5, stopping to fill ourselves with blackberries and salmon berries from the brambles that threatened to swallow part of the freeway alive. A section of the road was flooded, forcing Dennis to paddle through an algae lake as I hopped alongside him across the tops of vehicles, acting as his neurotic swim coach. Once across, I stared back at the freeway lake, marveling at the soupy devastation, while Dennis shook himself dry, releasing a halo of wet. I pillaged a small blanket from an abandoned SUV with punched-out windows, gingerly dabbing at Dennis's wound to dry it. I hopped in place, anxious to move on. I was stress-stuffed, a hot pocket of angst. Who knows what might have been lurking under that quiet film of green scum? A red-tailed hawk, talons tightly clutching at old habits, looped above the freeway, searching for roadkill, an extinct species. She started to follow us, but Dennis, full of piss and blackberries, told her where she could stick her razor-edged bill in strangled bugle howls. Dennis was really getting into this murder thing. Several street lamps later, we approached a gruesome scene. 7 colossal rib cages adorned with nubs of rotten meat sat on the freeway like a horrifying art installation. The road was stained deep red with blood and the slimy residue of entrails. Bovines. These were the foundations of what used to be some sort of cattle, picked almost clean by something. A bright rainbow suddenly streaked above us, almost too fast to register, a flock of colorful birds I couldn't identify or understand. So I was distracted, looking skyward, when a goat, skin stretched tight over bones, eyeballs bulging with the stress shits, shot past, startling us. We both noticed the purple wound where his tail used to be. He didn't make a sound, skittering into the trees, gone before we could get answers. Very ungoat-like. He had survived something unspeakable, hooves propelled by survival instinct. Dennis sniffed at the bone sculptures and raised his head toward the bold front line of evergreen trees. He didn't need to convince me further. We picked up the pace from there, knowing that Seattle had seen a change of Mount Rainier proportions and that whatever it was big and destructive and largely hidden from us. It was also safe to say at this point that I-5 South was officially the freeway of death. In all fairness, I've heard it described this way many times on the radio before, so not much change in that respect. Dennis and I followed the slippery eel of I-5 and listened to the trees, the moan of a madrone, the counsel of a Douglas fir, the shimmer of a cherry tree, the whine of a white-bark pine, paper birches, dogwoods, and oaks and maples and sweet gums and cedars and elms. Some shared memories of things that had occurred many, many years before on the land around their trunks. Slow stories of fights between lovers, the massacre during the lumber industry boom, the Great Seattle Fire, and the Klondike Gold Rush. Trees are super nostalgic. Others recited soothing poems in Sotovos, oral balms learned as seedlings. Some spoke of when the bison and the wolf roamed this land. They talked of change and whispered about a predestined event, repeating the word Renaissance and harmony. I had no clue what all this had to do with Michelangelo, but you don't argue with a tree. One thing was certain, they were full of beans, on fire with chitter-chatter. But, and I will swear on a Cheeto here, the Douglas firs were talking to me directly. This is as much a surprise to me as it is to you. This had never, ever happened before. least of all to me, a weirdo hybrid crow. Trees are normally very general and all inclusive with their wisdom pearls. When a tree decides to talk to you, it's a very, very big deal, as if the world stops, as if you are scooped up and held up in a snow globe, weightless and womb like. I felt their vibrations in my feathers, in the flutter of my little black heart. The Douglas firs were all pointing. Each had one solitary branch outstretched, urging me toward my destination, down I-5 into whatever lay ahead. To Oneida. As is polite and customary when spoken to by a tree, I answered back, calling out my thanks from above their towering tops. I followed humbly, pilot light rekindled, floppy skin bag bloodhound in tow. Intermittent mofo clusters, lone cobra-necked mofos, and Dennis not being a greyhound all added time to our journey south. To avoid mofos, we hid behind medians, construction sandbags, an ice cream truck with rancid lactose sludge smearing its insides, and an empty Lamborghini with the Seahawks logo emblazoned all over it. But most mofos seemed to be exhibiting the same sort of repetitive behavior that Big Jim had. I couldn't figure them out. They were at once distracted and dangerous, disturbed, stuck and broken, and yet somehow waiting for something. They smelled like hot garbage, and not the delicious kind. When we finally neared our destination, I shot above to take in Seattle's Pike Place Market, a touristic mecca that includes the original Starbucks, a wall encrusted with chewed gum, and men who lob fish at one another. Pike Place Market, its iconic red sign unlit, was teeming with mofos, and my heart beat its wings in delight. Hallelujah! Praise IHOP! They'd all come here. They'd all traveled down I-5 South and taken refuge in the market, among the beautiful flower displays, waterfront views, and specialty teas that cost the same as a kidney. I lowered, preparing to let out a caw of jubilation, and then my stomach fizzled into boiling acid. The mofos were shoulder to shoulder, loping in a writhing mass, spewing from the underground of the market and through its souvenir-lined corridors, bumping into one another, trailing their fingers, and bobbing their snappy turtlenecks. Every single one of them had what Big Jim had. I can only technically count to 9, but it seemed like millions. No growling cars, just the remnants of long rotten fruit, rotten fish, rotten mofos, and onesies with the Space Needle painted on them. I gagged. How could this have happened? How could so many mofos be sick? I was getting woozy from hunger pangs and wing-wrenching dismay. A stand that called itself the Daily Dozen Donut Company caught my eye. I perched on top of one of the stand's last remaining shelves. The stand had taken a beating, its cash-only sign dangling like a severed limb. Stools lay on their sides, legless and splintered. Glass sparkled from the market floor. A body lay near a silver stand mixer that was fossilized by its own icing. It hadn't been dead long. The perpetrator would still be close. The eyes were frozen in terror, glazed with torture. Someone had ripped its white body into 2 parts, a bisection. Teeth marked its entrails, ruby red, blood stained paper white feathers. Wonderful. Some of them were eating glaucous winged gulls. I watched the pulsing mass of mofos as they swayed and lumbered. Some were stationary and dragging their fingers like Big Jim. Some stared into middle distance as if reading something on the horizon. Others crept around face first, blood-red eyes bobbing like a pigeon's neck, in search of something. One mofo stood next to a pile of donuts that had been knocked off a 3-tiered silver platter and lay next to a jar that said, "God knows when you don't tip." The mofo directly between me and a pile of delectable donuts was wallpapered with nautical tattoos. A slouchy beanie sat on his head, his beard mimicking a comatose beaver. The suspenders and bow tie weren't fooling me, though. I knew this mofo's game. His left hand was pressed to his ear, and you could bet your ass I'd taken stock of that shock of bright red that dribbled down his plaid shirt. The glaucous winged gull eater. On TV, I've learned that crows, by nature, can be pretty persistent. If you've ever pissed one off, you'll know this. I think it's coded, cocooned deep in the fluff of our down feathers to hold on to things, ideas, grudges, your engagement ring. There was no exception here. By the fumes of NASCAR, I was going to get a damn donut. A stealth swoop, fueled by a growling stomach, shot me past the glaucous-winged gull-eater. He let out a high-pitched scream, a spleen-quivering skirl that caused the surrounding mofos to snap their necks toward him. Glaucous-winged gull-eater bit at me as I careened past him, just missing sinking his gull-stained choppers into my back. The mass of mofos let out a series of low-pitched moans, some sort of horrible summoning, then rushed the glaucous-winged gull-eater. They ran forward toward us, crushing the Daily Dozen Donut Company sign, the counter, the silver fryer, industrial cooking machinery, the trash can, everything in the herd's way. They charged forth, blood and saliva flying, tubs of sugar hissed through the air, a blizzard of flour blew down hard. They brayed with jaws wide, emitting a sick song. A woman with black braids and a large dripping hole in her midsection raced forward. A man with a broken guitar hanging from his back and plucked out eyes roared as he ran, pushing forward by a sea of mofos, led by an old lady with a knitted cat sweater and a face that looked like it had been sculpted from mashed potatoes. Two small identical mofos crawled on all fours, backs arched like quick cats, rippling with twitches and convulsions as they sprang forward, scampering up the other mofos, a breakneck clamor to get ahead. I dove from above, inches from their outstretched claws, snatching a donut in my beak and a bag of coffee beans with my feet. I shot myself airborne as the crowd smashed into Gloucester's winged gull-eater, trampling him, a mass of sickness and moans and devastation. Time to go. I flapped hard, soaring over Pike Place until the mofos were a formicary of moshing ants, a teeming swarm. Soldiers trampling soldiers. I lifted high, high, high above the implosion and dropped a sizable bomb of my own as I emptied my bowels upon the wild beast below. I had left Dennis at Waterfront Park near Pier 59, tucked behind Waterfront Fountain, a cubicle structure that looks like interlocking bronze keys. The area was familiar to me as Big Jim and I had come here once to install an underground electrical conduit. The fountain water no longer flowed. Instead, the still water was cloaked by green algae veil. The fountain looked deeply sad without a purpose. Seattle now felt like this, as if it was choking under a thickening green skin. The partially demolished Alaskan Way viaduct had none of its usual elevated roar and rumble. Now it was suffocating under an emerald green curtain of English ivy and Parnay cotoneaster. A ferocious growl ran up my spine. I pivoted to find Dennis hovering over a mass on Alaskan Way. I leapt into the air and to his side. Dennis rumbled with anger, saliva dripping from his jowls, eye white shining. The object of his aggression was a large, shiny lump, a ballooning buildup of tissue and blood. Slimy bubbles popped from its surface. The blob rose up and down methodically, as if it had a pulse. It jiggled like the filling of an uncooked pie, each wobble sending Dennis into madness. He puffed his cheeks, pursed his rubbery lips, and released growls that swelled into bold, trumpeting bellows. Row! Row! I don't know, buddy. I don't like it either, I told him. Dennis's loose skin flinched. His barrel chest heaved with the exertion of every howl. Starting to worry about his blood pressure, I lured Dennis with the donut away from the unknown thing that smelled like death and decay and molten iron. Weird lump out of sight, I had a little sample of the donut, which had aged nicely to the consistency of a truck tire. Delicious. 1,000 times better than the fried blobs Big Jim liked to get from 7-Eleven. He'd really been holding out on me. Probably because the Pike Place ones were too expensive. Big Jim hated that. Like that time he ordered a latte from Cafe Ladro. $5! And asked the barista when he should expect his accompanying testicle massage. A mofo wearing a manager badge and a monkfish face disinvited us from their establishment for eternity. Some mofos can be very obtuse. After I'd plucked off the mold and had a good sample of donut, I dropped it for Dennis, who chowed down happily. I'd say it was a testament to the quality and endurance of Daily Dozen donuts, but here I must remind you that Dennis's favorite snack is a dehydrated bull penis. The bag of Vashon Dark Side of the Moon coffee beans burst open easily, cloaking me in comfort with an ambrosial cloud of roasted nose joy. Oh, those delightfully nutty little rabbit turds were a welcome sight. Finally, something familiar, something that made sense. I nibbled on the beans while Dennis cocked a leg and relieved himself on the fountain. We would soon lose light, and it was time to find who we'd come looking for. I rattled, a sound like I'd swallowed maracas, for Dennis to follow me to the doors, or what was left of them. The belly of the building was dark, a briny, ominous smell leaking from its bowels. A quick breeze ruffled my feathers, crow bumps forming on my skin. Dennis stopped once we reached the white framing that used to hold glass entrance doors. He started a pace, swinging his pendulous head wrinkles from side to side. His paw touched some of the green water that bled from inside the building, and he whined. It was clear that I'd be flying solo here. Don't be a nervous Nelly, Dennis. I'll be all right, I told him. Obviously, he actually had been listening to my lectures back home on not being a hero. I probably should have toned those down a little, as I can be very persuasive. Dennis let out a yodel of protest, sniffing vigorously in the air. He paced, prodded, and whimpered next to a plant making a tenacious evacuation from its pot under a broken metallic sign that now read, Sit e aquar I told him to wait by the fountain again and flapped my wings erratically. He lifted his panicked, sap-sad eyes to me and barked, a stentorian alarm. The message, low and laced with desperation, needing no translation. Don't go in there. The nerves were making my legs quiver. Probably should have had about 40 fewer coffee beans than what I'd just enjoyed. Swooping through the building's entrance frame, I was plunged into a damp darkness. The little light there streamed from gaping windows, the broken teeth of the building. A fetid stench, briny and billowing like an old wet animal, punched me in the dick. Technically, crows don't have dicks, but that doesn't make me less of a dude. I perched on top of the entrance counter below 3 burnt flat screens. Water, dark and murky as ink, submerged the aquarium's floor. A scan of the lobby revealed a cinema screen-sized aquarium with its glass completely smashed out, water all around, water dripping rhythmically from wood beams above. I lifted up and glided over the gift shop, a flooded mess of soggy, moldy, stuffed dolphins and orcas and penguins. Honestly, who the fuck wants an effigy of those fat assholes in their home? Floating postcards, shell pillows, otter and Puget Sound themed t-shirts. Display stands lay submerged on their sides. I found Nemo, waterlogged with his face ripped off and stuffing erupting from his stomach. He had been lodged between the soggy paperbacks of a book display this whole time. As I dove further into the building, Dennis's barks became strangled, disembodied, the warnings of a fading ghost. I passed over some sort of stony structure, a high accurate recreation of a rock pool. I hopped down to inspect closer and found several starfish, tangerine and cherry colored, alive and living a quiet, thoughtful existence in the dark. Dead stingrays floated in the pools, a couple with chunks missing from their slate bodies. Anemones lay dead in the water, tentacles stiff and unfeeling. A giant glass half-moon arch, now smashed through its middle, had spilled its watery contents, adding to the murky flooding below. A clear body, impaled on the edge of the arch's broken middle, told me it used to contain jellyfish. What had happened here? I swooped into a walkway hidden in a cave tunnel that used to house a row of aquariums. The caves were flooded, every single aquarium face smashed out. Emerging from the tunnel, I flew over a decimated standalone Hawaiian fish aquarium and straight into the teeth of a great white shark. I squawked and shot back, startled by the mofo-made shark model suspended up high from the wood beams, his ghoulish grimace suggesting he was laughing at the aquarium's destruction. I circled back near the rock pools and hopped on top of another glass structure. This one was 2 tanks connected by a glass tube tunnel. The water inside was green and viscous, greedy algae slime licking all surfaces. This aquarium was remarkably intact, though closer inspection revealed several nuts and bolts at the bottom of the tank. The top of the aquarium had been removed. Something had found its way out. The flood below me rippled, frenzied splashes kicking up spray, Fish, a school of fish were fleeing. A glance at the rock pool revealed hysteria among the remaining sea stars. Sea star panic is very subtle, but I was onto that shit. My feathers ruffled. Hello? You idiot, stop calling out to predators. How much of a douche canoe can you be? A sound. The sound of a mofo hand wiping squeakily across glass. I hopped on one foot atop the tank, readying to take flight. A voice, strange and modulated, cut through the silence like a hot knife. I've been waiting for you. Wow. All right, that's the end of chapter 8. Come back next time. We'll do chapter 9.